Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life and several other podcasts that covers the city of Peachtree Corners. We have a great show today that we're going to be talking with Chris Linendau, CEO of Fusus, and which is actually based in Peachtree Corners. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hello, Rico. Thanks for having me on.
Sure, absolutely. Before we get into the show, I just want to introduce our sponsor, which is EV Remodeling. They've been a corporate sponsor of ours for the past few months, and they've been supporting our journalism not only on these podcasts, but through the magazines that we publish. So you can reach out to them. They've been a great supporter of ours. They are also based in Peachtree Corners. So speak to Eli, who's the owner at EV Remodeling Inc. And you can find that at evremodelinginc.com. So let's get right into it. Listen, technology has advanced so much as far as the last few years, and we've gone from having a ring on the door on the front door just to see if that UPS package came or if it's been taken, but nothing else to be able to do with it. Some people say, well, some of this technology is really not helpful, except that it shows maybe in the post event of what happened that maybe some crime occurred. And maybe sometimes it could be used to find someone. But in the move from going from Ring and smart devices that's out there to a bigger drive of home, not just private and commercial safety, but community safety, there's been a big void, right? I mean, you have Ring, you have a bunch of other devices out there, and even when I look at my home and say, well, I could have several different devices, they're not all talking to each other.
Right.
You've sort of solved that, right, Chris? I
Yeah.
mean, to tell us, and your background is military. I mean, it's a great background to have coming into this. So, in
Mhm.
fact, let me take a step back.
Yeah.
Give me a short 2-minute bio, if you will, of your background and your experience, and then we'll jump right into the rest of it.
Sure. Former military officer, graduated from the Naval Academy. Like so many, military personnel kind of transitioning into the private sector, you kind of think about, what's next. I always kind of had an affinity for technology. It was always something that I, enjoyed. So I decided to get into the manufacturing sector pretty early on in my private sector career. First with Panasonic, and then eventually transitioned to a large space and defense manufacturer called Moog, MOOG, building a
Mhm.
lot of things for the likes of General Dynamics and Raytheon. And then subsequent to that, I actually, for the first time in my career, got involved in public safety with a company called Utility that was building, among other things, body cameras and in-car video systems for law enforcement. And so if you look at where we are now in the company that I founded back in June of 2019, it was really an amalgamation of all of these different skill sets that I've kind of picked up, not only in my private sector career, but also prior to that, my military career.
Well, just a lot of background in safety and crime and helping certain agencies like that. And you're right. I have a lot of friends that have been on the police force and military, and it's amazing where they've gone when they've gotten out of that.
Yeah,
Um, so your company provides what's being called real-time crime center in the cloud.
right.
It's right. It's working not only with across the country with California agencies,
Hmm.
transforming the way they operate within their communities, providing safety to the communities that they represent, and building stronger relationships, it seems, between the businesses and citizens within those communities.
That's
Right.
right.
But you're also in Peachtree Corners, and you're based in Peachtree Corners. And just recently, the city actually signed a contract with Fusus
Hmm.
to be able to do some stuff here in the city. So, can you sort of explain a little bit about what that agreement entails and where we are with that?
Yeah, sure. So, the Real-Time Crime Center in the cloud platform is really a public-private partnership platform. It allows law enforcement agencies like Gwinnett County PD here in the West Precinct, which covers Peachtree Corners, which is obviously where our headquarters is, and that's where the contract is that you're referring to, our city here in Peachtree Corners. What it allows them to do is basically aggregate data sets throughout the community. And this is important for a number of reasons. First off, if you look at law enforcement as a whole, subsequent to the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis, which incidentally we were the platform that they used during the protest movements, and then subsequent to that, leading up to the trial. The old approach to just kind of putting police officers out on the street and having a kind of physical presence, it did not work in cities that were faced with shortfalls in budgets. In the case of Minneapolis, they actually removed at the time $8 million from the police department's budget, and of course, with that, the resources for a lot of police officers in that city. So they were faced with still an increased level of public safety need, but not the personnel resources necessary to address that need. And so that's where technology comes in. Fusus for the city of Minneapolis, like we will be doing here in Peachtree Corners, essentially builds a bridge to the private sector. So it allows the business community's video cameras, as an example, in public facing areas where vehicular traffic may occur, parking lots, entryways to buildings, areas of kind of public domain. Those cameras oftentimes capture incidents, and they can be life safety incidents, they can be criminal activity, and I think, Rico, you've documented in prior podcasts some of the prior activities that have been captured by our friends over at GCPD and their hardworking officers. Well, that just expedites that process even further. So this contract that you're referring to is basically the phase one of that public-private partnership.
So, if I understand correctly, there's a program out there. I think it's called Connect Peachtree Corners, where essentially not only are you being able to wire, if you will, or to bring into the network or the cloud private companies and city cameras, but you're also looking to register citizens, home residents, cameras, rings, other cameras that might be outward facing to roads and stuff voluntarily, where citizens like myself, if I have a ring or an outside camera or two, that I can actually volunteer to register to say, I have this here. If you need it and you're going to County Police and something happened in this neighborhood and you need that, they can literally know exactly where it is versus canvassing 100 homes to find out if any of them had a ring and if any of them were working. So that's truly part, I think, of expanding what you're doing, right? Being able to
It is.
provide that.
Yeah, and there's some nuance to it, because what
Okay.
we're doing with connectpeachtreecorners.org, the platform, the website that we're going to use to basically enroll willing participants in this public-private partnership, is really targeted towards the business community. So, in phase one, and at least for the foreseeable future, this is really not to bring homeowners' Ring doorbell cameras into the network. It's really more designed for Peachtree Parkway, Spalding,
Gotcha.
the businesses that kind of line those roads. And of course, on those businesses, on the front of the buildings, on the rear of those buildings, are oftentimes, as we all know, cameras. And that's invaluable data for all sorts of situations that law enforcement might need to respond to. So that's really where we're focusing, in concert with our friends with the
Right.
city manager and his staff, and our friends over at GCPD, is to really build a platform so that the business community can contribute in the live video streams. Now, there is also something called the Registry, Rico, and this is,
Okay.
I think,
I
what you
think,
were referring to.
right.
Yeah, and the Registry is really, it's a free service that basically says, my name is Chris, I have 3 cameras, here's my email address, here's my phone number, and this is the name of my business. And that's a free service. And that's huge, because that tells the investigators where they need to go
Mm-hmm.
if there is a incident in an area, to ask for video evidence. And of course, what they do in the Registry is they simply bulk request out to everybody in an area. If you can think of like just drawing a circle around an
Sure.
area, and then
Mm-hmm.
they can send a digital request. And of course, it's completely voluntary. In both cases, the Registry and the live sharing of video for public facing cameras, we're only asking for, people to share of their own volition, and they can remove themselves from the program at any time. So there's no, unilateral access on the part of the agency. It's completely donor contributed and
Mm-hmm.
controlled by the donor.
with the live feed, aside from the citizen part, then that's a registry. With the live feed, which includes um, private companies, commercial cameras, city public cameras. For example, Town Center has like
Right.
maybe 80 cameras. There's a bunch of cameras going down Peachtree Parkway and other intersections. And there's even cameras the city is willing to pay and put out on outside streets like near subdivision and such.
Right.
So all those would be live cameras that if Gwinnett Police had something going on, if there was a robbery, a burglary, a shooting, something somewhere, an abduction, that they can follow that track down a road, let's say, and they can literally pull up those videos.
It's exactly right. And actually, the way you described it, Rico, is almost identical to the way that law enforcement uses video technology. I was with an agency the other day, and they used through Fusus in an urban area. They tracked a homicide suspect as they went from camera to camera to camera, and then they followed that homicide suspect as they exited their vehicle into a business, and then through that business and the request for video from that business, they were able
Mm-hmm.
to identify, the facial image of that suspect. And so having that video, if you will, chain of custody, where you see, where a suspect has transited through an area, is of extraordinary importance. And we're not just talking about being able to solve crime faster. You're talking about possibly interdicting, actually responding to an incident in real time. And if you think about, in law enforcement, they talk about kind of that golden 48 hours, the first 48, as it's sometimes called,
Mm-hmm.
after a homicide occurs, you've got really the highest probability of capturing the suspect in that first 48. Well, let's talk about the first 48 minutes, right?
Right,
Think about how
right.
much we can do in real time if information is shared appropriately, while of course also maintaining people's right to privacy. And that's the other
Mm-hmm.
component of this, which is, it's important to note that we're not talking about cameras inside people's living rooms, or we're not talking about doorbell cameras facing off the side of, someone's home facing a neighbor's home. We're really talking about, major thoroughfares, parks, public areas
Right.
that are already under surveillance, where, the officer may in the past have to physically go to that location to acquire video. Now they have actually the ability to use that data in real time.
So let's stay with that for a minute because I'm curious. I have a few quick questions
Sure.
regarding that. So I'm in front of these screens, these monitors, and I see where I want to be, but I know I just missed seeing that. Can I? Is it like DVR? Can I reverse that feed to be able to see a few minutes before? Is
Yeah.
that possible to do that?
It is, and we call that a pre-record buffer. So,
Okay.
that buffer is configured. So typically what we'll see with like city-owned cameras, they'll keep the buffer, for a few days. And sometimes
Okay.
businesses will only share live video. Other times they may share live and maybe, some pre-record buffer that they're comfortable with. A lot of times that's 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
But, when you talk about incidents that are unfolding in real time, you really aren't talking about needing data, you know, a week in the past or a month in the
Right.
past. More of a
Right.
forensic activity. What we're talking about is, real time access
Right.
to data.
And during that real time access, I'm sure there's data showing up on the screens. It's almost like sci-fi, right? Like
Mhm.
like it's almost like what you see going on, near future type stories, and there may be data on there because some of these cameras may be license recognition,
Right.
plate readers and stuff. So with that, they could pull that up as well at that moment. So cars passing by, they're following it down the line, they're
Beyond,
able to
sorry, Rico, didn't mean to
go ahead.
interrupt. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, I know. I was just going to say, beyond just pulling up the license plate reader, think about pulling that up in context with surveillance video. So now you know where the vehicle was at the time. So
mhm,
now you have a time mark where you can pull up the closest available live surveillance feed, and you're seeing
right,
both in concert. Think about
right.
how officers would have responded to that in the past. They would have actually physically gotten in their car
Mhm,
and driven to a location that they hoped that a suspect would drive past. Now they're using what we consider to be more of an intelligence-led policing
mhm,
approach. And that not only helps them do their job, but it also makes best use of taxpayer funds, right? Because now you're not just throwing personnel resources at a challenge, you're actually using, technologically enhanced
Oh,
response mechanisms.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, I could go further and just say that I think that if they're following someone down the road, instead of ending up being a police chase, a car high speed chase somewhere, that actually can be ahead of where they're going almost throughout the chain and blow out the tires. I mean, and we're talking about cars, but it could be someone on foot as well to be able
That's
to
right.
see where they're going if they've fled the scene, to be able to more eyes on the street, if you will, to
Yep.
allow other surveillance to be enhanced with what they're doing, like you said. Um, so, I mean, I see a lot of possibilities. Now, to dig in a little bit more, we talked about privacy before. Facial recognition is part of what a lot of people know about, right?
Right.
Because your iPhone can recognize you.
Right.
It'll open an app based on your face. And it almost doesn't matter what you're doing sometimes, unless you're doing like a blow up face, then it might not recognize you, right?
Mhm.
But using AI, using machine learning, being able to recognize that is not necessarily part of what you're doing. Um, it could be done later, but it's also used for identification as well. No.
Yeah, so artificial intelligence is kind of a broad term and it gets thrown around quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
At Fusus, we kind of simplify that. So when we talk about what we've built, we have data scientists on our team, our research and development team. And what these data scientists do is they basically identify the fact that you have a white shirt on. I have a dark shirt on. And so if I'm looking in video for a missing person or an injured person and they're in a park and the 911 call comes in and that call says, well, this person's wearing a white shirt, that alone may take what is 1,000 people in that park down to 100, right?
Right.
So
Right.
now you're, by a large extent, really making that area of focus, more constrained, and that helps them in a real-time response scenario. Take that one step further, Rico, you're wearing a bag on your back, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now 100 becomes maybe 10. And then we'll add in there that you have blue jeans on, for example. So now that 10 goes down to maybe 2. And so artificial intelligence in our world is really just a way to kind of take what is a large, broad, view of video and
Mm-hmm.
really kind of funnel that into something that's actionable. Because, what you're looking at, Rico, you're dealing with human beings, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's this concept of information overload. And
Yeah.
so, there's diminishing marginal returns, obviously, on investment. As you add more cameras in a city, you can't just stare at more cameras on a screen and have a better idea of what's going
Right.
on.
Right.
It's inversely proportional, right? So
Yeah.
what AI does is it's kind of the equalizer. It says, listen, these cameras are now smart and they act almost like an alarm. We're missing a child that was wearing a backpack with a white shirt and blue jeans.
Mm-hmm.
Now our cameras in the city of Peachtree Corners can, you know, look out for that missing individual and then signal
Mm-hmm.
to the officers that, hey, we may have a possible match. And obviously that can make the
Right.
difference between, saving that child's life or them being taken out of the city limits. And that's obviously what we're trying to do.
Right. And so for an individual to hear that, that doesn't just mean that they're looking at other screens to say there's a child with a backpack. Literally, the system is recognizing that and will show those images on the monitor as the police are investigating it,
That's
I
exactly
imagine.
right.
All right,
Hmm.
cool. Um, the the platform rollout that you're doing in Peachtree Corners is pretty much what we discussed just now, right? There's that first phase. So I imagine there's a second phase. So what would be involved in a second phase of this?
Well, I think right now that's kind of TBD, but expansion is really, our area of focus. I mean, as we bring in more community businesses, the network effects take hold, right?
Okay.
The value of the system to you and I as citizens of Peachtree Corners increases proportionate to the buy-in from the business community. As more video sources and more alarms are put into the system,
Right.
the situational awareness of our West Precinct assigned Gwinnett County police officers
Hmm.
improved. And as such, the thought process is their ability to provide us public safety improves as well. So phase two is really at this stage thought to be more of an expansion upon phase one. In phase
Okay.
one, we're looking at really developing kind of a critical mass of adoption.
Hmm.
And I think we've identified some businesses, some areas of interest that we'd like to reach out to and encourage their participation. And then hopefully, obviously, bring solutions to issues that we're all aware of are now becoming you know um, you know more well known in Peachtree Corners in terms of
Right.
public safety.
Right.
So that's where the rubber hits the road. Does the system help GCPD provide a better service to us
Hmm.
as a community? And that's where I think we'll be keeping a close eye in phase one and making sure that our progress is measurable and defined, and then candidly that's something that as GCPD talks to members of the community through the cops forum,
Right.
that they can report when they have their cops meetings.
Not only GCPD, I mean, the system actually, because of the way the platform is set, not only can it use multiple different technologies, be drawn into different cameras and such, different operating systems, I guess, right? But you're talking across agencies too. So it's not, let's say something happens here, but all of a sudden that perpetrator is going into DeKalb or Fulton County or the
Yep.
city of Duraville or Brookhaven. If they're all wired within the system, you literally, there's really nowhere to hide to a degree, right? If you're a criminal. I mean, is that the goal to be able to do that?
Yeah, Rico, we always say criminals don't know jurisdictions, right? They will transit from one jurisdiction and into another to commit a crime and then go back, and that may be the jurisdiction that they live and is different from the jurisdiction that they commit the crime. And so for years and years and years, technology was siloed. Camera A didn't speak to software B, or
Mm-hmm.
software system A did not speak to software system B. And what Fusus has done is we've eliminated that. We've basically created bridges between all of these disparate systems, so that, among other things, law enforcement agencies can have inter-department collaboration. They
Mm-hmm.
call that mutual aid. And when you're
Okay.
talking about catching criminals and people doing the wrong thing, or even when you're talking about responding to a life safety situation, an ambulatory situation where maybe
Right.
the closest available law enforcement or emergency resource is actually in a neighboring jurisdiction, that's where this inter-agency collaboration through Fusus is so powerful. And we're seeing it all over the country. I mean, we've got now 120 plus cities and counties around the country that are connected, some very large cities, some entire
Mm-hmm.
state. Just here in the Atlanta metropolitan area, we have a wealth of mutual aid opportunity. You've got obviously the city of Atlanta using the system, Cobb
Right.
County, Fulton County, Sheriff's Office, Henry County, Roswell, Alpharetta. I mean, so you've got a veritable gold mine, if you will, of collaboration. And that's what Fusus endeavors to do. Obviously, Peachtree Corners has invested in certain number of cameras, both license plate readers and surveillance cameras in
Mm-hmm.
town center, and otherwise. But you think about maybe call it 150 cameras. Think about the 10,000 now that, to your point, Rico, our friends over at Gwinnett County through the system can utilize to kind of put the pieces together in an emergency. And that's what Fusus does.
Interestingly enough, I think if people knew the range of technology being used by different cities, different counties, different departments, where they don't meet each other, even within a federal government,
Right.
doing welfare, let's say, or Medicaid or Medicare. It took a while for some of these agencies to be able to talk to each other, right?
Yep.
Because they're using completely different platforms, completely different technology, and it's no different in law enforcement, right?
That's right.
Um, so being able to have a platform like yours, to me, just makes sense, and you're then now the power of what you're doing here across counties, because like you said before, I mean, criminals don't know jurisdictions. They might be in Fulton County and they might go up to Calhoun for the weekend
Right.
or something. I mean, anything's possible. Peachtree Parkway is a thoroughfare going from Midtown going all the way up to Johns Creek and Forsyth. I mean, you can make that drive over 40 minutes depending on the time of day, right?
Right.
Um, and things can happen, and random things can happen, as people know. Um, even part of so you have when people do burglaries, right? I think it was a Midtown Street just recently. There was
Mm-hmm.
like 20 car break-ins on the same street.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a ridiculous amount of break-ins, but people think a criminal would break into one car. Well, no, they're not there for one car. They're in a parking deck and they're going to go to five or six or seven different cars because that's how they make their money.
That's right.
Um, so if police can see that happening, because it could happen over a period of 40 minutes and no
Mm-hmm.
one would know, right?
Right.
But if police can see that, I mean, I can see how that is a benefit. And when you get someone like that off the street, that means there's less of that happening because that's not the only time that's happening. Right.
Well, and criminals also know a hard target versus a soft target. So if the
Hmm.
word gets out that Peachtree Corners is interconnected, that we have a public-private partnership between the business community and law enforcement, that
Right.
there's free flow of information sharing, and as such, rapid response from law enforcement, they're going to go somewhere else.
Right.
The word will get out very quickly. They're not going to be breaking into cars, breaking into businesses with the same level of frequency that perhaps they did prior to that engagement with the community. And that's why if you look across the country, Rico, this is the future of law enforcement. It's not just
Hmm.
something that's unique to Peachtree Corners. Community-led policing is really, if you talk about, what the buzzwords are in public safety today, community-led policing is probably at the forefront of the conversation. And it's not just law enforcement. I mean, mayors are actually running on community-led policing efforts.
Hmm.
And it just makes sense, right? I mean, you're saying, listen, we're going to make better use of taxpayer funds. We're going to bring the business community, members of the community, in closer collaboration with law enforcement. And what
Right.
that does, Rico, is it builds trust,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
fundamentally what we're achieving here is that now with quicker response and better collaboration, members of the community become part of the solution. And we all know change management, right? If you're trying to change the perception of public
Right.
safety, get people actively involved in the change. And so that's what we're doing
Yes.
at Fusus.
And that's great because I think because you brought up the Floyd incident from a few years ago, transparency is probably
Right.
the biggest thing.
Right.
More cameras means more transparency. Not only, in the situation of law enforcement, but also to make sure that law enforcement also acts responsibly,
That's right.
because they're all within the system. It becomes an important factor, I think, like you said, for that trust. And I can only see it growing because there will be more cameras. There will be more use, and I'm sure as your company evolves, there'll be more different uses that you may not have realized today that
Right.
may come up 12 months from now.
That's right.
Because with more activity, I think that creates more opportunities for advancing the system that you have.
That's right.
Um, so as far as Peachtree Corners goes, maybe you can, you guys have been in Peachtree Corners, I don't know for how long, but why did you choose to put your company here? Just
First
curious
off,
about that.
first off, I live here. And
Okay.
this the second thing is that I really liked when I was looking at where to set up our headquarters because we did look outside of Peachtree Corners as well.
Hmm.
Candidly, you think about hiring a lot of engineers, people that are fresh out of Georgia Tech, perhaps. You think immediately, okay, let's go Midtown, right? Because that's
Right.
you've got MARTA, available, and that's just
Hmm.
as accessible. But what I really loved about Peachtree Corners is, first off, it was, a very friendly community in terms of business. They were very supportive of us, the mayor and the city manager, Mike and Brian. They were
Right.
very supportive of us setting up shop here. It's also very technologically forward leaning city. And if you look at what Brian's done, it's just tremendous. I mean, he has really put this is kind of the Silicon Orchard. It is really it's kind of the East Coast equivalent, if you will, of the Silicon Valley. You've got a lot of companies coming here that
Yeah.
are, in the technology, sector. You've got autonomous vehicle, companies. You've got the
Hmm.
5G, and initiatives that Brian's been pushing forward. You've got the International Technology Collaborative that he's creating with countries like Israel. And so if you think about where you want to be as a technology company and where a wealth of talent will potentially, locate themselves, well, Peachtree Corners is a great place. So we've had a lot of success here. I would also tell you that the building owner, his name is Bud Agee, for the building that we're in. He was great to us. When we started Rico back in June of 2019, we had 5 employees. And as a new company with 5 employees, and we had a fold-out table, that was our conference table, right?
Oh, that's funny.
And all of us left, good paying jobs and really kind of, on a hope and a prayer, right? To make our own company. And so the building owner, was very kind to us when I said, listen, I can't sign a long lease and it's got to be a very reasonable monthly rate. But we wanted to be in a nice building because, we had confidence that we could, if we put our, heads together, we could grow something. And sure enough, Bud was really kind in giving us kind of a no lease space to rent. And, now I'm happy to report that I'm his largest tenant, and we have 100 employees and growing. And we did it in a little over, 2 years. And so pretty excited about where we are, but, even more excited about where we're going.
Excellent. It's good to have you here. And you're right, Brian and the city has done such a terrific job. I mean, this city, I think there are 20 countries represented here, between companies like Valmet, that's I think out of Finland, agencies and chambers like the French American Business Chamber that's located here. So, and companies like Intuitive Robotics that just is building out their 5-building campus. I mean, I don't think people understand, to some degree, that lived here for a while, how much is represented within the city. So cutting edge, having companies like yours here really has made a difference here. And certainly I'm looking forward to the difference it can make in community safety. So, yeah, it's good to have you on. I appreciate, Chris, your time with us. Everyone, if you're looking obviously for additional information, where can they find additional information on your company? Actually, what's your website?
Rico, we'll have the connectpeachtreecorners.org, connectpeachtreecorners.org website. We'll have that up and running here soon, and we'll have contact information and all sorts of ancillary data. So people are trying to learn more about the opportunity and how to contribute and how to participate. Please take a look at that website. And we're, of course, here, Fusus and Peachtree Corners, and they can always reach out to us directly at fusus.com. And we look forward to supporting the city. This is our home. This is where my family lives. This is where our children go to school. And so, obviously I have a vested interest in making sure that, this program's successful and that we take care of, our fellow citizens in Peachtree Corners. So thanks for having me on, Rico.
Sure. Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for being a good neighbor. Everyone, thanks again for joining us on this Peachtree Corners Life podcast. Look out for our next issue of Peachtree Corners Magazine and our newest Southwest Gwinnett magazine that'll be coming